I never had hope of anything. But looking back, I see that I was lost. Hope just came to me one time, and it lifted me. And I've had hope ever since. Hello, my name is Vernon Shaw. I live in Sligo in Ireland, and I'm originally from the Midlands in Ireland. I grew up in a family of 5. I was the youngest boy, only boy, 4 sisters, my mother and myself. I grew up in an alcoholic home. There was a lot of neglect, there was abandonment. The effect it had on me emotionally and mentally. Growing up in a home where alcoholism was a big problem. And I realized later on that I didn't have the same as other people did. I didn't have, I didn't have books in school. I didn't have clothes properly. Sometimes I didn't have enough food. Going to school, I fell away from school early in my teens. I grew to hate school really, and I stopped going to school. I started mitching at a very early age, mitching school, hanging out with other guys who were mitching school as well. I also suffered some sexual abuse as a young boy. I also realized that at an early age I could stay out late at night. My sister lived on one side of the town, and sometimes I was supposed to be staying with my sister, and sometimes I was supposed to be staying at home with my mother. So sometimes people didn't really know where I was. I could stay out late at night. I sometimes would leave school. I suppose there was no parental guidance, there was nobody watching over me. So I started hanging around in the streets at an early age. I started, at that stage I started sniffing glue, I started sniffing solvents, and hanging out with older guys, and at an early age I also started stealing, going in and out of factories and places like factories and businesses and places like this. And this went on for years, I left school at the age of 16. Funny enough, when I left school, I couldn't read or write. I was very close to my mother in my early childhood, and later, maybe in around the start of my teens, she didn't be at home much. She was very, I wouldn't see her much at all. She would be out most of the time. And, from maybe 11, 12, 13, sometimes I used to go and look for her in the pubs, and I used to visit her in the pubs, and she used to always maybe give me money, but really I was looking for her emotionally, and for her to be there for me. But I discovered years later that that's what I was looking for. I wasn't looking for money. I remember one time actually calling in to see her, and she was in the pub, and I remember afterwards leaving the pub and going down by the river, and I remember crying, and I was so sad, and I felt so alone, and really what it was she wasn't available. She wasn't emotionally there. She wasn't able to be available for me as a mother, and that was hard. I think that was one of the hardest things, and I kind of detached at that stage. I remember I think I actually detached from the home at that stage. My father died when I was 19, and I suppose I was on my way to London when my father died, and I was in Dublin, and I had heard that he had died, and I had to go back home again and for the funeral, and I think that had a huge impact on me as well, and my drinking and my drugging kind of got a lot worse after that as well. I didn't really have a great relationship with him, and we fought a lot. We fought a lot. From the age of 16 to 20, I basically started doing a lot of robbery. I started doing a lot of drugs, a lot of alcohol, a lot of drinking, hanging out in bars and pubs and nightclubs and things like this. Alcohol and drugs had played a huge part in my life. They had taken over everything. I thought of nobody or nothing, only myself. How I would get money for drinking drugs, what I had to do to get money for drinking drugs, to deal drugs, whatever it was I had to do. At the age of 21, I received my first prison sentence, which was 9 months for being a passenger in a stolen car. So the first time I got a jail sentence, I suppose at first I was going in and out of jail with people that I was hanging around with, who there was friends, and at first I suppose it didn't seem like much, you knew some people there, you went to school, you done different things, or you done whatever, but later on it became very hard. I became very withdrawn, very depressed. It was horrible, really. It was hard. I was in court one time, and it was said that for that year alone that I was responsible for 60% of the burglaries in that area, which probably would have been right, and maybe even a little bit more. I was angry that there was no intervention in the family home, that there was never anything done about what was going on at home. I blocked off my emotions with alcohol and drugs. I was emotionally numb, even though, I had a lot of stuff buried down inside of me. My sister died at the age of 42 when I was 33 or 34 years of age. My sister passed away from an alcohol-related death, and it stopped me in my tracks a little bit for a while. And years later, I suppose maybe 4 years after my sister's death, I found myself in jail. 18 years of being in and out of jail. I found myself back in jail, and I was in such pain. The despair, the depression was unbearable. I know at that time I did actually think that maybe ending my life would be a good thing. I do remember sometimes I would say what I would call as emergency prayers. I would say, "Oh God, please help me with this. Please get me out of this." But I didn't really have any faith in God. And for some reason or another, that night I laid in the prison bed. I was so broken, and I prayed to Him that if He existed, I needed help. What happened was, over a period of time, I began to get strength to go and ask for help from different people that I would never go to before. And from that, I went on into treatment. And after treatment, I came to live in a halfway house in Sligo, a recovery house. My first year or so in Sligo, I was really struggling to get recovery and to enter into recovery, into 12-step programs of recovery that I have been in for years. There's a lot of people working there, good people who helped me along the way. But there was one lady in particular There was one weekend I wasn't allowed out because I had given a dirty urine sample, and I wasn't allowed out, and I had to stay in for the weekend until Monday. So I would have a review on Monday. But this lady, who's actually in my prayer group now in Sligo, brought me to ask me if I wanted to go to Mass that morning, and I went to Mass with her. I didn't really think much of it at the time, and during Mass, near the end of Mass, I seen one of Mother Teresa's orders of sisters, which I always had. I always had a thing for Mother Teresa. I don't know why. I remember being in jail when she died, and following it through the papers, the whole lot of it, of her burial and stuff. But I went to talk to the sister after Mass, and just to say hello to her, and I started talking to her, and she told me then that they had a house just up the street from the cathedral, and when we left, that lady actually knew where the house was, and she brought me up to the house, and she introduced me to the sisters. Sister Joseph, who I come to know very well after that, and who brought me through the teachings of the Bible for about 8 or 9 months afterwards, and introduced me to my faith. I really didn't know my faith. I worked for 3.5 years after that as a gardener in their garden. And they nurtured my faith. The sisters would have prayer from 6 to 7 every evening. And I would go in from 6 to 7 every evening, I would go in for prayer. And for that hour that I was in prayer, I would have peace within myself. I remember coming out one after about 3 months, I remember coming out of the sisters one evening after prayer, and I was kind of doing a rain check on myself. I was saying, what are you getting out of this? How do you feel? And I felt good. I felt at peace. I was so hostile towards people for most of my life. I remember saying to the sister, she asked me how I was doing one day, and I says, yeah, I'm okay, And she says, I don't mind coming in here and praying with you. I like praying with you, but you'll never see me going over to that church over there with all those hypocrites. I had such a vision, or I had such an outlook of people who were in church. And some months later, I remember going to the sister and saying to the sister, guess where I was yesterday? And she was like, where? I said, I was over in the church yesterday. I had went to Mass, and it was beautiful. And the sister started teaching me about Mass, what Mass was about, and about the Lord and the presence of the Lord in the Eucharist. Actually, it really reminded me of my own sisters. I often said it to them, but it was like I entered into a family, and the sisters actually reminded me so much of my own sisters, of growing up in my own home, and the joy that was there sometimes, and the love that was there among us. It was from there really that my faith began. I started going back to church. That same year, I went with my mother to Lourdes, on a trip to Lourdes. And that first year in Lourdes, the first time I was ever out of the country, I made my first confessions in Lourdes. And it was the first confession I had made in about 15 or 20 years. And it was a very powerful confession. I also prayed when I was in Lourdes that I would be able to learn forgiveness and to be forgiven for the pain and that I would have caused to others, and for the pain that was caused to me. And they also started a movement called I Trust movement, which started about 2 or 3 years after I got to know the sisters. There was a movement that I Trust started, and it follows the teachings of Mother Teresa, and it teaches us charity, and it asks, we go out and we evangelize people, we help the poorest of the poor, I get to work with some people like myself who are in addiction and who are coming from addiction. It enables me to give back. I also do this through the 12-step fellowship as well. Really, the journey I have with the Lord today, with Jesus, I spend a lot of time in the presence of the Lord in the Eucharist. I proclaim the Lord to people when I'm speaking to them sometimes. If I feel prompted, that I sometimes try to bring people to the Lord. I bring them to adoration, or I bring them to prayer. I sometimes meet people who I know I know they're not in a good place, or they're not feeling well. I sometimes tell them I pray for them. I sometimes bring them to church. I sometimes bring them to prayer. And I proclaim the Lord in the way I live today. I am free now. And looking back from where I came from, I can see at different times, I've come from different levels. Over time, the despair gradually left me. There were times that I found myself being renewed. I found myself being lifted up. I have a strength, I have an inward strength today that only comes from the Lord, that I know comes from the Lord. It doesn't come from anything outside of me. I feel light within myself. I feel loved today, and I can love others today. I have empathy for myself. Sometimes I still feel sad, and the addictions are still always there and will always be there. But I know that the Lord has given me a strength inwardly that allows me never to have to go back to where I came from. It's nearly like the Lord has opened the door to freedom, and I've stepped through into His light. And I feel that He walks with me, and He is around me constantly. I see the Lord everywhere. I see the Lord in people today. I see the Lord in nature. I never looked up. I always walked with my head down. Today the Lord has allowed me to lift my head, and He's given me the strength to walk with Him.
Problems, worries, sadness. Are you seeking solutions?
Bible says,
Do not be anxious about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Choose faith over fear.